Thanks for the cards. Thanks for the presents. Thanks for birthday wishes. Marcia said, write a joke in, okay? And so thought this is pretty cool because she's heard my jokes forever. Same jokes over and over and over again. So here you go. Charles writes, benefits. Working for God does not pay much, but his retirement plan is out of this world. That's good. I like that. All right. I like this one. A minister told his congregation, next week I plan to preach about the sin of lying. To help you understand my sermon, I want you to all read Mark chapter 17. The following Sunday, as he prepared to deliver his sermon, the minister asked for a show of hands. He wanted to know how many had read Mark 17, and several hands went up. And then the minister smiled and said, Mark has only 16 chapters. I will now proceed with my sermon on the sin of lying. And this one, thank you, Shannon and Melissa. This is awesome. I thought for your birthday, getting older is like making a trip to the outhouse. Everyone's got to do it. It stinks, and you're glad when it's over. It's awesome. I might have to explain for some of the younger folks in the audience what an outhouse is. You do? Oh, that's good. That's good. My son knows. That's awesome. Thanks. Got some new jokes. All right. I guess you can hear me now. Is it? Yeah. Okay, good. We started a series, Everything Has a Starting Point. That's our series, Starting Point. You've had a starting point. We're glad that you're here. And we've also understand, if you would show us the first slide, faith has a starting point. There we go. Faith has a starting point. For most of us, it started when we were kids. Maybe it was the church you grew up in. Maybe it was the mosque you attended, the synagogue. Maybe it was vacation Bible school. Maybe it was church camp. But all of us had a starting point. Poing. Sorry, my pinky didn't work right. Is it the forefinger? Okay, my bad. I'll try to fix that for tomorrow. It's a joke, right? Okay, sorry. Yeah, you're the guinea pigs. Where's that spell check when you need it? All right, there you go. All right. So for many of us, our faith got damaged along the way. I mean, the time that we learned about Jesus was about the same time that we learned about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. And the idea is that we matured, but our faith in Jesus a lot of times has not matured. Or it's the rigors of adulthood that cause us to kind of get away from Jesus and the belief in Him because life gets busy. You know, maybe the things just didn't seem to be practical or needed. So practically speaking, when we're getting into tonight's part of the series, what is the role of rules? Now, have you all had rules growing up? I bet your parents had rules for you, right? Give me one rule that your parents had. Don't lie. Now, is that what your rule is for your kids, or that's what your parents told you? That's one of you pass it on down to your kids, right? Okay, what's another one? Don't talk back, okay? How about another one? Don't lie. Don't what? Don't roll your eyes at me, all right? Was there rules in maybe the church you attended? If you attended church growing up, did they have rules? Don't run. My kids got a new rule applied into the church that we were at Gentry. No Heelys. That was those wheels like skates that you could, roll down because they were afraid they were going to run over the old people. Cause them to trip. So no Heelys in church. What another one? But you can finish it. That's a good rule. That helped me out one time. My parents had that. I went home and I told my dad that I said, there's this girl and her name's Patricia and she wants to fight me. And my dad told me, never punch a girl, never fight a girl. And so I told Dad, I said, she wants to fight me. Now, she was like 3 or 4 years older than I was. But is she a hurricane? Is that the one coming through right now? Okay, so that makes sense. All right. Yeah. So anyway, he said, if she hits you, if she punches you, whatever, then take care of it. And I did. So, practically speaking, rules are often the centerpiece of religious life. You know what's interesting? If you look at all the different religions in the world, they all have rules. But none of us ever get to make the rules, do we? Somebody else gets to make the rules. Sometimes we wish, internally, in our heads, maybe in our dreams, maybe we even said it out loud, I would like to make the rules for once. Maybe I could make up my own religion. Just don't drink the purple Kool-Aid, all right? So look at this. Obedience determines whether you're a good Muslim, whether you're a good Christian, whether you're a good Catholic, whether you're a good Jew, whether you're a good Presbyterian, whether you're a good Baptist. In the sense in churches that we grew up with, there were a lot of rules. I can pick on Baptist because I was raised Baptist. So we had a lot of rules. It's like don't do this and don't do that, and you can't say this and you can't think that, and you can't drink this and you can't chew that. And so they had all of these rules. The Presbyterians had rules. The Methodists, we thought they didn't have enough rules, okay? And so as you go on, there are all kinds of different rules. Look at this next slide. In all the major faiths, last week we looked at 3 major faiths, okay? Can I get one more slide from you? There we go. The 5 pillars of Islam's, okay? The 5 pillars of Islam. The 10 Commandments. Have you heard of those? The 10 Commandments? And then a lot of New Testament Christians believe in the Sermon on the Mount. And so in some cases, disobeying the rules gets you kicked out of the faith community. Gets you kicked out of the faith community. I had a student one time that came to our youth group. We knew him when he was a child, and he started coming when he was 20, started playing in our praise band, was helping us out, and he got really frustrated because he wanted to do what I did. He wanted to get up in front of the youth group and speak. And so he came to me and he said, I want to do what you do. It's like, what's that? He goes, I want to speak to the youth group. Okay, great. I mean, it's awesome when I feel like somebody wants to be called. I said, so what do you want to say to them? He goes, I want to tell them that the Mormon religion is true and that they can trust it. And I kind of went, I don't think I can let you say that because this is not Mormon, this is Christian. I said, I'll tell you what, here's what we'll do. I'll let you say it, but you have to let me interview you. You've been involved in the Mormon church. Yeah, just for a little bit. I said, okay, well then I want to be able to explain what Mormonism is. And I want to ask you some questions. And so we did. We had a debate kind of on stage. I allowed him to talk about Mormonism and all that stuff and what they believed and how they believed. And then I began to dismantle part of his religion based just upon archaeology. Because the Bible has a lot of archaeology, or archaeology has revealed, how does he say it? We read stories in the Bible sometimes, and then archaeologists find things that we've read in the Bible, and we go, oh, okay, yeah, okay, great, it makes sense. In Mormonism, the battles that were fought, all of that stuff, there's no archaeological base to verify any of those battles. Nothing. No wagon wheels, no chariot wheels, nothing. And there was even a point in there where we talked about the story of Abraham last week. And in the story of Abraham, if you remember, when he went down to Egypt, he told his wife, if the kings, okay, if the powers that be find you attractive enough, which you are, and they want you, they'll kill me. So let's just say we're brother and sister. That way, when they take my wife, they won't take my life. So the whole idea was that when they went down to Egypt, Pharaoh saw Abram's wife and said, I want her, go get her. And so they go to Abram, is this your wife? And he goes, no, she's more like a sister to me. All right? And in the Mormon Bible, it says that God told Abraham to lie. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. And he goes, well, why not? He goes, it's the rest of the story. And I'm like, but that doesn't make sense with other portions of Scripture, like Proverbs. And in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus talked about it. But in all throughout the Bible, you see that God does not like liars. So why would God tell one of his chosen people to do something that he hates? And he goes, I don't know. And I said, well, see, that doesn't make sense. Because if God hates liars, in the Bible, in all 66 letters that we have in books, there is nothing in there that God tells anyone to lie. And so I have a hard time believing the faith of what you're talking about. But when we talk about rules, okay, when we talk about rules, the reason I told you that story about that kid is it wasn't too long, it was about a year or so after we had the discussion on stage and he left the youth group and went to the Mormon church and stayed involved there. He did something wrong and he got kicked out. He got kicked out of the church. And it's like, wow. So, each group has its own spin-off of even subset rules, of rules that were kind of like, really? I mean, even in the Jewish tradition, there were another 1,800 rules of the 600 that God even laid out. The religious leaders thought of 1,800 more rules to help them keep the 600 rules that God gave them. And you talk about red tape. And so, it fuels the sense. Rules fuel the sense of judgment with the idea that maybe we've grown up with a finger-pointing God, with a finger-pointing Jesus, like you shouldn't do that, or you shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't talk like that. And so when you think about that, think about this. Look at this next slide. Rules always assume a relationship. Rules always assume that there is a relationship involved. Look at it like this. I come up with these models. Look at the next slide. You have the family model, okay? The family model, and then you have the club model. Let's look at the family model. The family model, in some cases, okay, relationship precedes rules. Parents, you establish rules for your kids, right? And for all of us, our parents established certain rules for us. Now, what's interesting in this model is that you don't have to get a set of rules before you can be part of the family. I mean, I've said this, my wife said this, our parents have said this, you've probably said this. I brought you into this world, I can take you out of this world, okay? But the idea is that when they came into the world, we didn't give them a list of rules and say, okay, if you'll keep these rules, then you can be a part of our family. No, they were a part of our family, and then as they grew up and matured and became more responsible and had more freedoms, we began to set certain boundaries for them, to disciple them into adult people that, hopefully would benefit society and not degrade it. Then you have the club model. The club model, in some cases, the agreement with rules is how the relationship is established up front. If you want to be a member of this club, then here's a set of rules. Read them, sign them, turn them in. Then you can be part of the relationship. The club model says that maybe it's like work. You go to work and you get hired on, and as you get hired on, they hand you a list of rules, okay, or certain things that you need to keep in order to keep your job, and you sign that. It's a contract. It's an oath. But the relationship is contingent upon that signature, upon that agreement. Maybe your family even operated more like a club model. Maybe your dad said, if you don't keep these rules, then you're out of this house. You're not part of this family anymore. Okay? I added this one just for fun. Okay? Go to the next slide. You have the family model. You have the club model. You have the neighborhood association model. Okay? If you have been in big cities, okay, counties have this too. You can buy land, you can set up a house, you can do all this stuff, but if you don't abide by their rules, then you get nasty letters in the mail. You might even get fines for certain things. Now, you can keep your house, but they try to make it difficult maybe where you want to move out and not have that house anymore. we have these things in our cities called ordinances, right? And as I was in Lincoln and we were getting ready to move, Marcia's mom and dad, they were moving up into this area. He bought this lot. And he wanted to move his RV that they'd been living in for like 4 or 5 years down in Miami, Florida, up here and live in it until they get their house built. And so Lincoln just started establishing ordinances. And I started looking into this and found out that they were not going to be allowed to do that. And so I went and talked to one of the councilmen that I knew that went to our church, and I talked to him. I said, Alvy, I said, my father-in-law is moving up here, and he's bringing his travel trailer. He's been living in it for 4 or 5 years. He wants to build a house. But on the lot that he bought, it says, according to this, that he can't live in that RV until he gets his house built. I said, we have a problem. I said, is there a variance? I said, can we get just like a timeout, and allow him to move it in there until he gets his house built? He goes, well, there should be. So let's take it to the council. He took it to the council members. They all voted it down. Because the funny thing is the whole street was full of trailer houses. But they didn't want trailer houses anymore. So the ordinance was, once you moved a trailer house out, you could not move one back in. And if you bought a piece of land along that street, you could not move a trailer house in, and they considered the RV like a trailer, and so therefore they wouldn't do it. Alvy, being my friend, resigned from the councilman, from the city council that night. Well, if that's the way it's going to be, I quit. And he walked out the door. And I'm just kind of going, well, what did I just start, And all of a sudden they were like, oh, well, he can't do that. We can't let him do that. And they went out and they got him. They brought him back in and said, I'm sure there's something we can do. And so they worked out a deal. Now, I thought what was funny is there was a councilman on that when we were building a house on that same lot that he had a trailer house, and every day he'd drive by our place and he'd turn me in for something this or something that. But it wasn't just me. He picked on everybody in town. So he was an equal opportunity offender. And even the police would come and they'd show up and they'd say, you need to cover that old truck up out in the back lot, with a tarp, or do something, or get rid of it. I got wrote up in the paper for nailing on our house after midnight, which I don't ever remember nailing after midnight, but all of this stuff. And so, it's like they make your life, feel like, just give me some freedom. But we also understand rules do provide freedom. I mean, in one of the 10 Commandments, and we'll talk about this, not in detail, but one of the 10 Commandments say something like, don't murder, don't kill. I mean, isn't that a good rule? I mean, even though I told my brother and my sister at times, I want to kill you, I didn't really want to, because that would infringe upon their freedom. So that's an equal freedom for everyone if we don't do that. So in the world of faith and religion, this gets confusing. It's like our parents, where you don't get kicked out, just disciplined. Or like a club where or maybe an employer where you work, it's based upon compliance. And so you've got to sort this faith journey out. And so we get help from some clues in Scripture, okay? As we looked at the 10 Commandments, all right? I'm going to tell you where they're found. So that way, if you don't know where they're found, maybe this will help you, because I've seen a lot of surveys done about the 10 Commandments, and people, I've kind of heard of them, but I have no clue where it's at, and they come up with all these different rules. But look at this next slide. The 10 Commandments were created around 1446 BC. So that means if you back up, Abraham didn't have any rules. Noah, there was really no rules. We know that in Genesis that there was one rule. Don't eat of that fruit on that tree, okay? And so here, the 10 Commandments we find in Exodus chapter 20, okay? Say that with me. Exodus chapter 20. Now, where are the 10 Commandments found? Exodus chapter 20. So, the 10 Commandments appeared around 1446 BC. They appeared about 1,500 years before Jesus, okay? And 2,100 years before Islam. This is one of the oldest sets. It's not the oldest, but it's one of the oldest sets of rules that we find in history. So I want to pick up where we left off last week with Abraham. God promised Abraham that he would become a nation. And if you remember, Abraham was a little frustrated with this because he didn't have any children. And then Sarah came to Abram and said, here's my handmaid. I can't have any children, so here's my handmaid. Have a child with her. And hopefully that's God's plan, because she can have children, so let's work this out. And so she has Ishmael. Ishmael is the son of Abraham from Sarah's maid. And then later, Sarah becomes pregnant. And she has Isaac. And God comes to Abraham and says, this is the child. This is the promised child. What's so unique about the story of Abraham and Sarah at this point is they were so old that their fertility was dead. They cannot have children. But God resurrected that dead thing in them and created new life, which is a picture of what happens to us with Jesus. So Abraham, as the King James says, beget Isaac. Isaac beget Jacob, and Jacob beget 12 sons. And so through the nation, from the 12 sons, you have the 12 tribes of Israel, and Israel becomes a nation. And Ishmael is the son from the maid, who was later, because Sarah got jealous and kicked them out into the wilderness, and then they became the Arab nation. And guess what? What's the news tell us almost every night about these two nations? They are in constant conflict, correct? But Sarah gives birth to Isaac. Abraham dies without seeing the promise fulfilled. He doesn't die a nation. He dies just a father. Isaac had a son named Jacob, whom God renamed Israel, which means blessing. Jacob had 12 sons, and the descendants of Abraham were eventually enslaved into Egypt. If you remember, there was Jacob had a son. His name was Joseph. Okay, he was next to the youngest, and he had a coat of many colors. Okay, and so his brothers didn't like him, and when he came to bring them food and stuff, they said, hey, let's just kill him. And the oldest said, being the responsible, and we can't kill him, but let's make it look like he's dead, and we'll sell him off into slavery. We'll make money off of it. That's even a better deal, right? Okay, we won't just kill him. We'll just sell him. We'll make money off of it. We'll tell daddy's dead, and then everything will be good. Well, Joseph ends up in Israel. In Egypt, yeah. He ends up in Egypt, and he becomes the prime minister. And he saves the world from starvation, from drought. I mean, he moves his family down there. They get the best land, and then they live there for 400 years. They get so many Israelite people growing from Joseph's family that the Egyptians begin to get worried, and they're like, they're going to outnumber us, and they're going to take us over. So let's make them slaves. And so they enslaved them and made them slaves, and the Israelites built the cities and built the roads and built everything for Egypt as slaves. And then God, after 400 years, God did something very unique. We have Genesis. What's the next book? Exodus. Which means, if you think Exodus means something like the sign up there, exit, okay? God sent a deliverer. God hasn't really been around. Not that he's been hiding, but he just hasn't really spoke to Israel. And then in their turmoil of being slaves, God does hear their prayers. And God sends them a guy named Moses. And this book of Exodus also talks about the Ten Commandments. Where is it found? Chapter 20, okay. And so 3 months after they left Egypt, okay, because at this point when Moses came in, if you remember, the whole atmosphere, the whole physical realm of nature went berserk, right? I mean, water turned to blood, gnats, mosquitoes, all this nasty stuff was moving in. And finally, Pharaoh was like, hey, take your people and go. Take whatever you want from us and go. And so they left. I mean, think about it like this. The people have been enslaved for hundreds of years. And Moses shows up and says, God has heard your prayers, and he wants to take us back to the land of our forefather, Abraham. Abraham wasn't a dream that we just tell our children and said, everything is going to be okay, but he actually was a real person, and there is a real land, and the Bible describes a land of flowing with milk and honey that is a land of blessing. And so through this land, God wants to give it to us. And they're like, but we're slaves. We can't do anything. God will deliver you. And so he did all the plagues, and everything turned upside down. And then Moses comes and says, okay, tonight, you need to pack because we're going to leave in the morning. What? Really? We're going to leave in the morning? Yes, pack tonight. Kill a lamb, which they've always done. Okay? Roast the lamb, but do something different. I want you to put the blood on the doorpost. So they're like, we're going to leave in the morning? Yeah. God says, trust me. We're going to do what with the blood? Put it on your doorpost so the death angel will pass over you. Really? God says, just trust me. I'm going to deliver you. We're going to leave in the morning? Yes, we're going to leave in the morning. Trust me. And in the morning, when morning comes, Pharaoh says, go, get out of here. Here's gold, here's silver. Just take whatever you want and just get and leave us alone. And if you remember, they get to the Red Sea, and Pharaoh changes his mind, and he chases them, and they're blocked. They can't go anywhere. And God tells Moses, put your staff over the water, and he split the water, and they crossed on, not muddy ground, dry ground. He delivered them across. He said, go into the water, go through, picture of baptism, go through on dry ground. Trust me. This whole time, God is saying, just trust me. So, through this whole thing, Moses spoke for their God, and God had given up on them, but Moses confronted Pharaoh, and nature went crazy, and the economy of Egypt was decimated. All the nations, as Israel passed through the wilderness for 40 years, heard about the God of Israel and what he had done to Egypt. And after demonstrating his power, God said to the nation, trust me. Now they were free. Now they had done nothing to deserve anything. They just simply trusted God. So then God gave them their first commandment. Okay? So I want you to look at Exodus chapter 20, and let's pick up in verse 1. Actually, would you back up a little bit, or was that the next slide? Go back to the... Okay. Verse 1. God spoke all of these words to Israel. Okay? Here's what he says. I am. Remember when Moses was at the bush, and he sent Moses to be the deliverer? And Moses turns back and says, well, who shall I say sends me? I am. That's a whole nother sermon series. Okay. I am the Lord who? Your God. Now think about this. God is speaking to the people, and they're saying, you're our God? Our God? What have we done to deserve you who delivered us? And he's like, nothing. He just chose some people. We saw that he just chose Abraham. And he's chosen him to bless all nations. And so here he tells them in verse 2, I am the Lord your God who, okay? Look at the rest of the verse. Who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery. Why did you do that, God? Because I heard your prayers. I have chosen you to be my people. We're your people? Yes. But we haven't done anything to deserve your grace and your mercy. That's okay. Look what he goes on in verse 3. He now gives them, go to the next slide. Okay, the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. Here's what I want you to notice. They were His people before He gave them rules to follow. God chose the parent model. You're my people. I've chosen you. Now, here's what I'd like for you to do. Just have no other gods before me. Can you imagine their thought process through here? Israel's going, wait a minute. You delivered us from the Egyptians. You decimated their economy. You fought battles through the 40 years of wilderness. And you want us to have no other gods before me. I think we can do that. You're a pretty powerful God. Yeah, you can put a check in that box that I'll have no other gods before you, okay? That's what they're thinking. So, in the story of 10 Commandments, you see that as they put this together, the 10 Commandments were a confirmation of their relationship with God, not a condition of their relationship with God. God wasn't giving them laws to get in relationship with Him. He was giving them laws because they were already there. The story of the 10 Commandments teaches us one new lesson and affirms what we discovered last week. That with God, relationship, look at the next slide. With God, relationship precedes what? Rules. God opts for the family model over the club model. Israel disobeyed God. Like any good parent, he counted 1, 2, 3, go to timeout. 1, every time they disobeyed. 2, 3, go to timeout. One time he sent them in timeout for 70 years over in Babylon. He chose the parent model. God refused to give up on them. God refused to say, you know what? I chose you as my people, but you're not doing what I told you to do, so I'm going to choose me some more people. God didn't do that. The relationship was initiated by a single act. They trusted Him. They put the blood over the doorpost. They packed their bags. They left. They walked through the sea. They walked through the wilderness. The relationship was initiated by a single act. Just like we saw with Abraham last week. Abraham believed and God counted it to him. He reckoned the books and said, you are righteous now. Just because he believed. Neither Abraham nor Israel obeyed the rest of their days. They always disobeyed. And they tried to do what was right, but they would get away. They would disobey. They would do something wrong. But God never, never, never gave up on them. There's actually a book, and this is why I trust the Bible so much. Because why would God put a story, okay, a true story, in His Word about one of His prophets who would marry a prostitute? And then she left and went back into prostitution. And God says, go get her. And He had to buy her back. And He stayed in relationship with her. It's the book of Hosea. I mean, God, in the relationship, helped them to trust. He established it. So what's the role of rules? Look at this. Next slide. Rules are a confirmation, not a condition, of the relationship with God. Let's say that together. The rules are a confirmation of, and not a condition of, a relationship with God. God gives rules to those who are in relationship with Him. I mean, even Jesus said in the New Testament, if you love me, you'll do what? Keep my commandments. I mean, how many times we tell our children, it's just a couple of rules. If you'd really love me, you would do that. I don't have to keep asking you over and over and over and over and over again. But as parents, we keep asking them over and over and over again, and we keep loving on them. So this makes you wonder, assuming if any of this happened, what if, look at this next slide, what if God played favorites? What if God said, Abraham, you trusted me, I believed you, or you believed me, and I counted you for righteous. You were great. You were awesome. Israel, I chose you, and you've been pretty good. You've had your roller coaster, put you in timeout, all this stuff, but, you're my people. I chose you. Americans, I don't know. Maybe, you're a nation under God. Okay. Canadians, I don't know. That's a whole different. Europeans, no, I don't like Europeans. What if God played favorites? What if he did that? Maybe the rest of us better behave ourselves. Maybe the rest of us is like a club model. Maybe we need to keep the commandments in order to get in with God. But as we'll discover, just like God did with Abraham and with Israel, God's love for the world drove him through the promises of Abraham, through the promises he gave Israel. God made Abraham and Israel a promise that went way beyond Abraham and Israel. You remember, God told Abraham, you'll be a blessing to what nations? All nations. Not just Israel, not just the Romans, to all nations. Look at this. Genesis 18:18. Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the what? Nations of the what? Earth shall be blessed in him. Not just the nation, but you will eventually become all nations. And then later he spoke through the prophet Isaiah. He said this in Isaiah 49. He says, it is too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to bring back the preserved Israel. I will make you a light for what? The nations. God tells Israel, you're going to be a light to all the nations. You're going to show all the nations my love for them. That my salvation may reach to the end of the what? Earth. God tells Israel, you're going to be a light and you're going to show everybody my salvation to the end of the earth. There's even a story that's written in, there's a whole book about it, Jonah. Just 4 little chapters. God shows up and says, Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh, and I want you to tell Nineveh that I have salvation for them, that they need to repent, and they'll be saved. And Jonah says, no, I'm not going to do it. I mean, Jonah's like, do you know who the Ninevites are? They're wicked people. I mean, they kill their firstborn and offer them to different gods. Why would I go to them? Because if I go to them, you're going to forgive them, and they don't need to be forgiven because they're wicked people. We've never thought like that, have we? But the whole idea is you will be a light for all the nations, for my salvation. This was never about Abraham or Israel. This was never about just a few people. This is about the entire world. It's about you and me. So we should not be surprised that when Jesus shows up 1,500 years later, that he too would demonstrate the power of God. I mean, the world went crazy. The economy was going nuts. The physical world around them, things were going crazy when Jesus showed up. I mean, the stars, the angels, all the stuff, the shepherds. But John knew, who knew Jesus from the beginning, summarized it this way in John chapter 1, verse 12. But to all who did receive him, Jesus, who what? Believed. Believed what? In his name, he gave them the right to become what? A club model? An association model? No. Children. God chose the family model. The right to become children. But what did we do to deserve to be children of God? Nothing. And you can't do anything to become his children. That's why I love the phrase, and I don't know who coined it, but the idea that there is nothing that you can do to cause God to love you any more than He already loves you. He demonstrated His great love for you by sending Jesus to die for all of your sin, so that you can become children of God. He uses that over and over and over to those who believe. I mean, that's why he says in Romans 10, 9, and 10, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is the Lord, He's the controller, He's the master, He's the guide, that He's the one that's going to control your life. You give Him His, He'll take it, He'll do with it what He wants. He's the master. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you shall be saved. You'll come into relationship with God. You'll be returned back into and become the children of God. Which leads us to next week. So this question is this. Growing up, did you feel like religion was based on the family model or the club model? Family model or club model? Think about that this week. Talk about it with those that are around you. See how they experience God. Was He a finger-pointing Jesus? Or was He a God that loved you, brought you in, and as you grew and as you mature, He disciples you, disciplines you as children? Because we know. You've seen them. I've seen them. Just go to your local Walmart. There are children who are not really disciplined. And you want to jerk them up and show them who's boss, right? You'd like to take the parents aside and say, let me help you, okay? Because a child who is not disciplined, and this is pretty harsh. In Hebrews, God says they're like bastard children. If they're not disciplined, He's pretty harsh. Well, but in Israel's day, they were 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. They were married, living, they got married young. So I think we just let them off because we don't want to discipline them. We don't want to disciple them. We don't want to mimic love for them as God loves us. I think that's so important. Let's pray.